Ladies and gentlemen, like the previous year, we have a set of statistics for the media, like how many bills have been handled, how many pieces of subsidiary legislation, how many questions were put, and the motions put by members. All the statistics will be made available to the media. Within this year, 23 bills have been passed. The government introduced a total of 20 bills during this session. Why is it that we pass more bills than the number introduced by the government? It is because some of the bills were carried forward from the previous year, and we passed them after the completion of the scrutiny. In terms of subsidiary legislation, some are subject to negative vetting. We have 150 items tabled, 135 completed. For those subject to positive vetting, there have been 16 motions all passed by the Council. You're aware that over the past couple of years, we spent quite a bit of time looking at the appropriation bill. This year, we spent more than 100 hours on the appropriation bill, and we managed to pass it in time. As you are also aware, we had to deal with a very important motion, and that is the motion on the electoral reform package, the method for selecting the chief executive and Annex 1 of the Basic Law, and that was voted down. As you know, over the past year, because of the arguments over the electoral reform, the Secretariat had a pretty heavy workload in the vicinity of LegCo during the Occupy movement. There were so many people gathering outside, and there were incidents of people storming the LegCo. When the motion was put to the vote, on the basis of the police advice or information, we took some special measures, and I'm sure that it is still fresh in your mind, and that did cause a bit of inconvenience to the media, and thank you very much for your forbearance. The statistics that I cited may not necessarily accurately indicate or show the relationship between the executive and the legislature. We can look at the number of bills that we handle and subsidiary legislation that we handle every year. But it doesn't mean to say that the more bills we pass, the better the relationship is. Or alternatively, the fewer bills we handle, the worse the relationship between the executive and the legislature. It doesn't mean that because some of the bills may be more controversial than the others, and we may have to spend an awful long time on a controversial bill, and some may or may not be passed. So simply looking at the statistics doesn't actually reflect the state of the relationship between the executive and the legislature. I did say before that the executive and the legislature are monitored by the members of the public. Both are serving the members of the public. If the relationship is good, it can't be too good, because the legislature is here to scrutinize the administration of the government's bills or motions on behalf of the members of the public. So the members of the public wouldn't expect the legislature to endorse the government motions or proposals without any questions asked. Conversely, members may have their own views about the government. If the government proposals receive a majority support of the public, if they are closely related to livelihood and economic issues, the council would not block them. So even if the relationship is bad, it wouldn't be so bad that the proposals favorable to the members of the public will be blocked. But this year, since the executive and the legislature didn't have constructive, cooperative relationship, I feel that the rejection of the electoral reform package was an indication of that. The package for the election of the chief executive in 2017 was controversial. The bottom line of the central authorities, the August 31st framework, and has a bit of a gap, or pretty large gap, with what the pan-democrats are asking for, and that is sufficiently clear. But in the course of the scrutinizing the package, I'm not sure how the members of the public feel, but my observation is that the opposition, or the pan-democrats, and the government should have engaged in constructive and beneficial discussion. Of course, there were meetings with the central authorities, but they were merely stating their own positions. And it was stating their own respective positions. Before the voting took place, the government officials also got in touch with different political parties. But basically, that didn't do anything to narrow the gap between them. Those in opposition did not change their mind.
In the process, we really didn't see any spirit of cooperation or any mutual consent or attempt to narrow the gap between them. We don't see such efforts. There is a problem with the legislature-executive relationship. Our term is approaching the last year. Last year, in summing up, I said for the year that we are now looking back would be very important because of the important decision we would have to make on electoral reform. And that would determine whether we can have universal suffrage for the C election in 2017, and then after that, universal suffrage for the LegCo election. Now, this year is coming to an end, and we failed in that account. And the SAR government is not going to reintroduce this proposal within its term. So for the next year, for the remaining year of our term, well, we have to consider what else we can do. Now that the electoral reform has been rejected, we will need to look at what we can do to improve governance. There are still some important bills which might be controversial, and we need to deal with those. I know the international community is paying attention to our copyright ordinance or the copyright amendment bill and whether the bill would be passed. The government is going to table this bill after we resume. Now that the electoral reform is a thing of the past, in the remainder of our term, we'll have to focus on important bills. We need to do a good job in scrutinizing those bills to respond to aspiration of the public and of the international community. I'm willing to take questions now. Apple Daily, President, you said, well, perhaps you can explain, for the remaining year, there's nothing much you can do to improve the legislature-executive relationship. The electoral reform was vetoed a month ago. The CE talked about promoting a harmonious relationship between LegCo and the executive. What else you can do? What can you do in the coming year? Well, actually, I'm not just looking at a specific period of time. And also the level of cooperation between the LegCo panels and committees with the government. Well, we have reunited with China for 18 years now, and we have been seeing the emergence of problems over the period. The relationship between the legislature and the executive is not a question about individuals, or it's not also about whether we have some radical members in the legislature, because well, the institution, the system we have do not afford the executive a stable majority support in the legislature. In the past year, members discussed a lot about the work of the executive vis-à-vis the legislature. For example, the free-to-air TV licensing incident. Well, but EXCO, business is subject to confidentiality rules. There's nothing that can be brought up for discussion. So this may not be in line with what people want in this day and age. And the political accountability system has been in operation for more than 10 years now. But maybe but so far there's been no review of how well it has been doing. So some people think that the political system we have is running smoothly, but without universal suffrage, such matters are getting difficult to handle, and no one can really put them on the agenda. We want to increase transparency of the government. We want to make political appointees to be more accountable to the public. We can have debates on such subjects, but the debates wouldn't be able to improve the system. That's what I was referring to. Commercial radio, Channel 5. You said the executive and the legislative were not able to narrow their difference or to be engaged in a constructive dialogue when it came to the discussion on the electoral reform package. This year, it seems that you have had more disagreements with members as chairman. So you are going to be the chairman for one more year. Do you have any advice for the new chairman? Well, this will be the last year when you will be chairman or president of the council. Do you have any advice for the future president? Well, the public may come to different assessments of how the members of LegCo have performed. But I cannot agree with the saying that quality or performance of members has deteriorated. Well, their performance is multifaceted. The performance during the meetings is one of many aspects. And there are other ways that the members of this council will have to fulfill their duties, discharge their duties, including the scrutiny of government papers and engaging the government officials in discussion on governance-related issues, and also to handle complaints from their constituencies. I believe the public would assess their performance in a comprehensive manner. When I chair council meetings, I would, of course, like to see that debates that we have are of high quality. And I believe members share this expectation. You said that during the meetings that I chair, and in your words, there were more the disagreements or arguments. Well, those are isolated cases. In the in the last C question time, what I found disagreeable and unhappy about was that when the CE was speaking, some members kept raising points about rules of procedure. As chairman of the meeting, I wouldn't wear it. I don't think that should be done. That would be disrespectful to the one who is speaking.
So that was how I responded at the time. This is indeed the last term I am chairman or president of the council. If I don't have to step down prematurely, next year, around the same time, I will be meeting you again for a review of the year. But I don't think I have to respond to your question regarding what advice I have for the next president. I'm sure that in the council there are quite a few members who are capable of becoming president, and with the support of an experienced secretariat, I am not at all worried about not being able to find anyone to become the president. My observation about the electoral reform shows that the opposition and the government failed to engage in a discussion with a view to resolving the problems and fostering a consensus. I think there can be subjective factors and objective factors involved. Objectively, the August 31st MPCSC's decision was announced, and that caused some reaction in the community. Even in the community, there were diametrically opposed views. And in the council, you have the pro-establishment camp and the pan-democratic camp, and there was quite a bit of pressure on them over the years since the current term of administration has been in place. On the question of constitutional reform, we failed to establish the foundation for us to engage in dialogue and to form a consensus. President, you mentioned the CE's question time. I'd like to follow up on this. The chief executive asked you to rule on the behavior of one of the members. Do you think that it was unfair? And you got worked up and told members not to remind you of the rules of procedure. Did you have the CE in mind when you said this? Well, under the rules of procedure, the officials attending the meetings will enjoy the same status as councillors. They do have the same rights and obligations. Does it include the chief executive? The rules of procedure doesn't say the chief executive, but I like to say that if any member can stand up and raise issues over rules of procedure and ask me to rule over the way a certain member acts, then the same right would apply to the officials. And I don't think the chief executive should be excluded. So there was nothing inappropriate for the chief executive to mention that. I must admit some hiccup. I did talk with the Secretariat about how we can improve the situation. That at the moment, the arrangement is such that the chief executive is standing right in front of the president, so I couldn't see the chief executive. Through the PA system, I didn't hear properly. Then there was no visual image to make up for the lack of message. So I didn't quite hear what the chief executive said well enough. So it wasn't the case that I heard what the chief executive said and didn't handle it. It was afterwards that I became aware of that, and I reminded Mr. Albert Chan not to engage in that kind of behavior, and he did that. So what I saw was the members, pro-establishment members, stood up one after another to interrupt the chief executive and raise points of order for me to rule on, and it wasn't appropriate. From the members, subsequently, I learned that after I gave the ultimatum to Mr. Leung Kwok-hong, Mr. Leung still kept talking in his seat. And he was disruptive to the members sitting around him. And I didn't hear that. You may say that I have some problem with my hearing, and I have gone to an ENT doctor to have a hearing check, and subsequently Mr. Leung yelled in his seat, and I heard that, and I had no option but order him out of the chamber. If Mr. Leung Kwok-hong kept speaking in his seat and the chief executive didn't stop talking, that disruption wasn't to such an extent that the chief executive felt that he couldn't carry on. So I didn't feel that I had to take any action at the time. But a couple of members stood up one after another and asked me to hand down a ruling and impose the rules of procedure, and the chief executive had to stop, and that disrupted the chief executive. As I said, since it was broadcast live, it was the chief executive's Q&A session, it was broadcast live, the audience in front of the TV would expect the chief executive to be able to answer the questions raised by members uninterrupted. And if he keeps talking and someone stood up and asked me to do this, that, or the others, it wasn't appropriate, and that was the reaction I had at the time. President, two questions, if I may. A moment ago you mentioned the relationship between the executive and the legislature. You analyzed the situation from the institutional point of view. It seems that the relationship is getting more strained. Do you think that it has to do with the attitudes of the members and the officials? Second, how do you think the relationship can improve? What role can the legislature play? The Shanghai trip was led by the President that facilitated the dialogues between members and the mainland officials. In the post-reform era, what do you think you can do to facilitate more exchanges? On the first question, if you talk about the human-to-human relationship, the personality, or the way one conducts himself will certainly have a bearing on the situation. But if you're talking about the relationship between the executive and the legislature as two institutions, then the problems certainly would be those of the institution. It's not the case that with new members and with the new chief executive, the problem now got worse. I mean, every single year when I summarize the year, the relationship between the executive and the legislature would come up without any exception. I mean, nobody asked me any question about the good relationship between the executive and the legislature.
So it's about the system, the institution. If it's about personal character or personal conflicts in a personal relationship sense, well, they are minor. Those problems can be solved. In the last term, when I assumed the presidency, I already said that I would like to see in that the different parties in the legislature, including the pan-democrats, can establish a normal and establish a communication system with the mainland officials. LegCo has to handle many issues. And I would say there's none which would have no mainland element involved, or issues that we do not need to consider the mainland aspect. After the reunification, the SAR government and the central authorities are having closer and closer communication, right from the C level to senior government officials. The communication with their counterparts on the mainland are much closer, and this is in line with the needs of Hong Kong and for its development. We must have a normal channel of communication. Unfortunately, I've been the president for 7 years. Nothing much has improved. And I've got another year to go, and I note that Zhang Xiaoming, the director of the liaison office, said that he would like to invite LegCo members to go on duty visits and to the mainland. I'll be more than happy to see that happen, and that members from different parties in this council will be able to join such visits and to engage themselves with mainland officials.
Focus with the political reform debate has been on the legitimacy of future administrations. But after all the events throughout this year, with the walkout in this year's vote, with the scandal regarding your WhatsApp messages, and also with the indefinite shelving of the universal suffrage question for the Legislative Council, how much credibility do you think, or legitimacy, does this institution hold in the eyes of the public?
The credibility of what?
Of the Legislative Council in the eyes of the public.
We will know when the next general election comes. After all, members of this council were elected into the council by the public. And as we all know, most of the members have been elected and re-elected a number of times. So they must have had the support of their constituents in becoming a member of the council. So if they have lost their credibility and their support from the public because of anything they have done during their term, then obviously it is for the voters to decide whether they should return or not.
Relationship between the executive and the legislature after what happened this year, what's your overall assessment going forward of this relationship? Do you think it is possible to make amends and to...
I believe that the fundamental problems in the relationship between the executive branch and the legislature lie within the system itself. One reason why I believed that it was so important for us to move forward by passing the constitutional reform proposal put forth by the government was because I hoped that by putting aside this dispute over our constitutional development, we can then concentrate our efforts on addressing all these other problems in our governance, in our political system. So, unfortunately, we failed to do it, and I can only remain pessimistic about the improvement of the system itself. However, if the failure to pass the electoral reform package means that both the executive branch of government and various parties in the council will now be willing to put aside the political disputes and work together to solve some of our problems in our economic development, in addressing the social inequalities and so on, then maybe we can find a platform for better cooperation between the two branches. I hope that this will be the case in the next couple of years.
Thank you, President. I'm from Radio Hong Kong. In your Chinese remarks, you said there's not much else to do in the rest of the year to improve governance. You also made a reference about improving the system, but we don't see in the foreseeable future that there would be any chance to implement universal suffrage for the chief executive, so there's not much systematic changes we can have. Are you so pessimistic towards the way that, in terms of having a representative legislature to reflect the people's views to the government, from that sense, is Hong Kong heading towards a somewhat unamendable path since there's no systematic changes forthcoming? And do you think that you said there was no constructive communication between the lawmakers, the governments, and even the Beijing officials? Is this just going to go south, go downhill from here on because of the failure of the political reform package? Thank you.
I am pessimistic in the sense that the very fundamental problems in the flaws in our system will continue to be there, because with the with the failure of the constitutional reform, I can't see any possibility of both the executive government and the various parties in the council to turn and look at those problems and try to work out ways to solve them and improve our governance. So I believe this will continue to be the case for some time. Yes, we have an elected legislature. However, our system of government is supposed to be executive-led. Many or all of the important decisions by the government are made by the chief executive in council, the chief executive and the executive council. And although we always say that we, as members of the legislature, are representatives of the people, we also know that people, different sectors of our community, have different aspirations, different interests. And very often, debate among ourselves, among representatives of various sectors of community, may not in itself lead to consensus, lead to a conclusion which will have the support of the majority of the people. it is still for the government to come forward with policy proposals which the government believes to be in the best interest of the community as a whole, and to work and try to win support from both the various political parties and the general public. The government, the executive government, must have the willpower to do so. They must have the necessary the determination and the skills, the political skills, to accomplish it. And so this, I believe, is a very important quality of effective governance. And if even the legitimacy of the government is questioned by the general public, of course, it will be very difficult for the government to have enough political competence to achieve these results.
President, if I may put two questions here. A moment ago, there was mention of trips to the mainland. Some LegCo members don't have the home return permit. Are you going to seek to get a home return permit for them? During the electoral reform period, the Pan Dams and the government failed to establish effective relationship. Now, over the ITB proposal, do you think there is a basis for two branches to build effective relationship? Over the past couple of years, there were all councillors making the trip to the mainland, and an absence of any home return permit didn't constitute any problems. Since they are invited to join the visit, arrangement will be made for them to enter the mainland unimpeded. Be that is may, as a member of the council, I very much hope that all councillors would have the travelling documents for them to move in and out of the mainland freely. About 2 years ago, I did try to do something in this regard. The chief executive also put in quite a bit of effort. So last year, before we visited Shanghai, I understand that the chief executive did try his very best for all members to be given the home return permit. My understanding is that there are some mainland authorities in charge of the entry and exit who held different views, and some members who don't have the home return permit said that if the issuance was done in a selective way, they would rather not have it. So it was stuck there, and that's true. Subsequently, we had the controversy over the electoral reform, and Occupy movement did cause quite a bit of tension, and that issue has been put aside for the time being. In the days to come, I'm quite prepared to do something to get this resolved. But I must admit that not we did try before, and it is rather difficult to get this achieved. As regards the second question, there are some government proposals that are controversial, specifically the IT Bureau proposal. It's not a question of the conflicts between the executive and the legislature. It's not a question of the legislature steadfastly refusing to approve it. It's only a minority of the members who object to it, and they are taking advantage of the procedures to delay the voting process. And they're just taking advantage of these procedures to delay the voting. This is the objective fact that I observe. Even among the pan-Democrats, some openly indicated their support for the IT Bureau. For the others, they may not openly indicate their support, but they said that they wouldn't be assisting in the filibustering the proposal. So it's not a question of the confrontation between the executive and the legislature over this issue. Now, since there is room for people to take advantage of in our procedure, unless the members are changing their mind, or unless the chairman of the committee can find some rationale to stop this kind of behavior, we're stuck with this kind of situation. I hope that the public would not view this as a lack of improvement in the relationship between the executive and the legislature. President, since the WhatsApp incident, when you preside over the meetings next year, do you think you will be facing more challenges, more questions about your fairness in presiding over the meetings? Since I became president, since the last term, all members, all Pan-Dam members adopted a skeptical attitude. I was a member of the DAB, a member of the pro-establishment camp over the past 7 years. The Pan-Dam members were cooperative, and I tried my very best to preside over the meetings in an impartial manner in accordance with the rules of procedure. I would take the advice and suggestions of the Secretariat in chairing the meetings. Now, after the WhatsApp incident, there were doubts cast on me in relation to the impartial chairing of the meetings. Now, after that incident, the meetings carried on, and I presided over the meetings. And I didn't see any Pan-Dam members not cooperating with me or because of this incident.
We all know our responsibility towards the public, and also what should be done during our meetings. Well, I would take this as a reminder for myself that in future meetings, if I do something that might lead to suspicion of loss of impartiality on the part of the Pan-Dams, I believe they will be more willing, they will be more ready to challenge me. So I would regard this as a reminder for myself as regards whether there will be biases or impartiality problems. Everyone will be monitoring my performance, including the Pan Democrats. President, from now, you said the deterioration of the relationship between the executive and the legislature, there are objective reasons and subjective reasons. What are the subjective reasons? Well, we are talking about the controversy surrounding the electoral reform. It was very unfortunate that at that time that the Pan Democrats and the government failed to establish a healthy interactive relationship. That's the objective environment. As regards subjective factors, when you look at the Pan Democrats and the government and take into account what they did in the past, why they were unable to establish a more constructive relationship. And you all saw that after the current government was established, and even before Mr. C.Y. Leung assumed his post, the opposition members started to ask for his stepping down. And after Mr. Leung became CE, he did try to invite different political parties to breakfast meetings and the like. And he said that even if you don't like Chinese-style breakfast, you can they could order the egg and sausage, but the effort could not be sustained because those attending the meetings didn't find them constructive and useful. But I think it takes two sides. It's not really the very comprehensive to point the finger at either side. I think the crux of the matter is the electoral reform and a diametrically opposite view about the reform package. I hope that that's what happened. And now that this is beyond us, maybe we can establish a better relationship of cooperation. That's what I want to see. And I note that after the reform package was rejected, the CE started to invite Pan Democrats to talk to him about livelihood issues. And then when the Democratic Party came out from their meeting with the CE, they said, well, they had no objection to such meetings. There was no hard feeling. So it's better to have such meetings than none at all. We still have one more year in our term. So we can so-called make some so-called improvements. I think this would be something the public would like to see. President, do you think that in the Council the voices of moderates have become weaker? Do you think anyone from the Pan Democrats will be eligible for president? Well, it's definitely yes for the second question. It's not a question of competency. Well, I'm not the most capable among the 70 members, so it's not a question of competence. The president must be accepted or trusted by the most members or all the members. I have participated in 2 elections for the presidency, and the line drawn was always clear-cut. I will represent the pro-establishment camp, and the pan-Democrats will nominate one. And in the vote, all the votes from the pan-Democrats would go to the one they nominated, and the pro-establishment camp will all vote for me this time, at least. In the first time, some didn't. So basically, I would get all the votes from the pro-establishment camp. That's the political reality. Whether or however many or however capable the pan-Democrats are, they need to get the support of the pro-establishment camp to get elected. So that's why I don't think it would happen. Second question. I think it goes against conventional political wisdom. By this, I mean that at any time, the extremes are never the majority. It's always, the majority is always the moderates or the middle ground. You may have this impression because they express their views differently. Those who hold extreme views, either pan-Democrats or pro-establishment members, they tend to do it in a high-profile manner or in stronger terms, and therefore, well, their voices are more easily heard, and the voice of the moderates is more difficult to reach you because of the argument over the electoral reform, and in that period there was the occupation movement. The community experience a strong or very serious division, and we have heard that even among family members, the arguments tend to be very severe and divided. So views were very polarized. Now that the electoral reform argument is over, I hope issues on economic development or livelihood would be discussed in such a way that the moderate would find a greater voice. Well, I think all 69 members are more capable than me. They all have their strong suits. Thank you. Again? The speaker's off mic. Maybe someone is snitching on me. She watched it through the live broadcast.